My name is Mr. Godwin Obene. I lead research, policy, and strategy at the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. In the context of this assignment, I worked with the TUGA team that first put the report of the TICPI analysis for the first time in 2020, and also the current one for 2024. Now, today's event will be anchored by a veteran of the Anti-Corruption Policy and Institutional Development Program in Nigeria, who was instrumental to this project, first in 2020 and later for this year. But before she comes up to take charge of the proceedings, I want to give her permission to do a brief overview of this report, which we are all going to discuss today. As I entered earlier, this report is what you can call a follow-up addition to the first one that was done in 2020. That work, which later had the heads of the anti-corruption agencies on board, including the Attorney General of the Federation and the Presidency, sought to provide a deeper understanding of the CPI, that's the Corruption Perception Index, by disaggregating the index into its component indices and what each specific indicator speaks to. Now, our anchor for today's event is best placed to tell us the very significant outcomes of that process in 2020. So when she comes up, she will be able to do justice to that. This year's analysis sought to expand the scope from 2019 to 2024, covering a 6-year period. Now, I want to say a few things. As one who participated in producing that report, the first one and even the current one, I want to say a few things about the analysis that was done on this report. Now, this analysis by TUGA is not a validation, or it's not meant to be a validation of the TICPI. It's also not an advocacy for the TICPI index. The objective is to help the drivers of the anti-corruption policy and institutional program in Nigeria to understand what the index is communicating to all of us. Now, while we find a number of weaknesses in the index, when we first analyzed it in 2020 and the current one, and I can mention a few, one of the weaknesses we found was always going to be the risk of circularity. The way in which ladies and gentlemen, pause a bit to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished chair of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Mr. Ola Olukoyede. Mr. Ola Olukoyede, you're welcome, sir. Please have a round of applause. So, like I was saying earlier, a few weaknesses that were found in the TICPI index, which is one, the risk of circularity of assessment, where you're likely to have the results of one data source or rating institution impacting and reinforcing the computation of the TICPI itself. So, for instance, the 8 data sources that used to traditionally come into the assessment of the CPI are likely to be reinforced by the fact that we have traditionally or consistently been ranked low by TICPI. Another weakness is the use of different, the non-uniformity of data sources. So there are 13 data sources in general in all. So you have a set of data sources for a set of countries. And maybe you say because of lack of availability of data, you use a limited data source, number of data sources for others. It questions the validity of applying the results across board and use that to rank countries. And there's also the issue of not having uniform period of assessment for all countries. So for instance, for some of the data sources, you find results coming from as far back as their corruption perception index or corruption perception indicator for 2022. You are using data for 2024 to assess others. So there are those weaknesses there. But having said that, we believe that it's important for us to even understand the data and to be able to engage those who we feel are wrongly classing Nigeria among the list of very corrupt countries. So having said a few things about the TICPI, I won't go into details because there are people who have been who are going to do justice to that, present the report in depth. Having done all of that, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to now invite to the podium, like I said, a very distinguished veteran of the anti-corruption policy and institutional program in Nigeria. Someone who has had about 3 decades of anti-corruption policy work, both in Nigeria and beyond the shores of this country. She's done extensive work in terms of the various corruption risk assessment exercises that have been conducted for various sectors of the economy in Nigeria, and even the UNCAC assessments that sought to assess countries on our compliance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Without saying much more about her, some of us here already have been familiar with the personality and her credentials. Permit me to invite Ms. Lilian Ipianyanwu, formerly head of TUGA, now doing a lot of other things about anti-corruption, which I believe she will update us about. You're welcome, Ms. Ipianyanwu.
Thank you very much, Godwin. Please permit me to stand on the existing protocols, but I will nonetheless warmly welcome and acknowledge my former boss, the executive secretary, and I can see sitting next to him the chairman of the ESDP, and then other distinguished heads of agencies here present. It is a pleasure to be here this morning. Actually, it isn't surprising that TUGA has asked me to facilitate the discussion this morning. Let me give a bit of a historical context. In 2020, the office of the Vice President called TUGA when the CPI came out, and the Vice President expressed concern at the continued low ranking of Nigeria in the index, despite the investment in anti-corruption and the global acknowledgement that Nigeria ticks the boxes in the different areas of fighting corruption. And this puts us in a dilemma. The question is, does it mean we're not doing well as a country? And in particular, this puts me in a different kind of dilemma because I'm a member of the International Council of Transparency International. And I know how thorough the different assessments we do are. So this challenged us to commence the analysis of the TICPI under the supervision of the then Vice President. And we went behind the data sets that are used. The first thing that we discovered is Nigeria is one of the countries that they use a high number of data sets, not less than 8 at any point in time. And these data sets are from reputable organizations. So we couldn't really question the sources. Godwin has given us a few of the identified weaknesses which go across board, and later on today, when the output of this analysis is presented, we can also see the details of those analyses. Now, having said that, I would also congratulate us here today that Nigeria, in this current CPI result that I released, moved marginally from a CPI ranking of 25 to 26. It looks like something small, and it's actually a movement at a snail pace. But given the challenges we have had over the years, I think it's something that we should celebrate and find encouraging. So can we give ourselves a round of applause? I remember many years ago, under President Obasanjo, when anti-corruption was also very much on the agenda, and the then minister, when we also moved marginally in the TI-CPI index, the then Minister of Finance, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, said, yes, we've made a little progress, but we are still in the wrong level when it comes to the rankings where we are. So, like she said then, we are still in the wrong neighborhood. You will see from the analysis that even within the sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria still is at the lower rung of the ladder. The one thing interesting, which will be encouraging to the anti-corruption practitioners here present, because I know over the years we have agonized that despite the work we put in, Nigeria is still ranked very low, is that these data sets are beginning to pick up the output, the results of the different activities we do. For instance, one of the data sets spoke strongly to asset recovery, how Nigeria is doing in respect of recovery of proceeds of crime. I'm sure the chairman of the EFCC will be very proud, and ICPC as well, because they are taking the lead globally in terms of recovering Nigerian assets outside the country, as well as assets within the country. The second issue that the data set also spoke to was Nigeria now beginning to oversight the constituency projects. This one I know is the baby of ICPC. So they are beginning to pick up the initiatives that we are doing, and it's now reflected in the data. Nonetheless, they also pointed out a large area of weaknesses where we need to improve on. So if we add up the two, the areas we are doing well and the areas we are not doing well, and shine the torchlight on those areas, I'm sure with time, we will continue this movement into the right level of the anti-corruption agenda. Having said that, I think we should now take opening remarks from the head of TUGA, Mrs. Jane Owumere, who is unavoidably absent, still committed to the fighting corruption, and she couldn't be here today because she had to be somewhere where her presence is urgently also needed. Is it ready?
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Lilian Ikanga, my former boss and the former head of TUGA. Your opening has made my work a lot easier. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, my
Please
video is on. Okay, so, the Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer, Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NETI, Dr. Orji Ogbonnaya Orji, the Chairman, Code of Conduct Bureau, Dr. Abdullahi Bello, the Auditor General for the Federation, Mr. Shaka Kanyito, the Executive Chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Mr. Olanipekun Olukorede, representative of the Chairman, House Committee on Anti-Corruption, Honorable Moshood, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I welcome you all to this public presentation of the report of the review of 6 years 2019 to 2024 of the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index of Nigeria, aimed at enhancing transparency and accountability and improving Nigeria's ranking on the index. I would like to start by expressing my apologies for not being physically present today to unveil our newest and very important knowledge product on the Corruption Perception Index. As much as I tried to be present, it became practically impossible for me to be. I would therefore like to thank the heads of agencies and our guests present who have made this a reality. The TICPI is an annual ranking published by Transparency International that assesses the perceived levels of corruption in the public sector across 180 countries and territories. The CPI is widely regarded as one of the most authoritative global measures of corruption, drawing on a variety of data sources, including assessments from organizations like the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, among others. It seeks to measure levels of corruption using 13 independent assessments conducted by 12 global governance institutions. Each country's score is a combination of at least 3 data sources drawn from the 13 different corruption surveys and assessments. The average scores for each country give the perceived corruption score and serves as an indicator of the level of corruption in the country. It is important to note that it is an assessment of perceived levels of corruption and not an actual assessment of the effectiveness of the work of anti-corruption agencies. The data sources used to compile the index often cover manifestations of corruption, such as bribery, diversion of public funds, excessive red tape in public sector, which could create corruption vulnerability, corruption in appointments in the public service, ability of government to contain corruption in the public sector, state capture, access to information and public reporting, amongst others. Over the years, there have been divergent views as to whether the CPI assesses the effectiveness of government activities in the fight against corruption. Anti-corruption agencies and other key stakeholders are often unable to understand the basis for the scores and ratings, considering the achievements and gains made in the fight against corruption. Therefore, in 2020, TUGA commissioned an analysis of the index titled TICPI. Does the index tell the true story about Nigeria? The analysis unpacks the data sources of the CPI, including the methodology of the research and indicators used. The analysis of the CPI was conducted with the specific objective to review the methodology which has been critiqued and identify elements of the assessment that may provide opportunity for remedial action and support the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Based on the findings in 2020, TUGA worked with the Office of the Vice President and was able to link the findings of the analysis with Executive Order 1 on ease of doing business. It was on this basis that the Nigeria Port Process Manual, one of the outputs of the Project Steering Committee on Corruption Risk Assessments in the Nigerian seaports, of which TUGA serves as the secretariat, was launched by the then Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. Since then, alongside other reforms in the sector, there have been considerable progress in the fight against corruption in the maritime sector. It is hoped that this process will encourage more of such projects in the various areas covered by the Corruption Perception Index and gradually positively impact on Nigeria's rating. I'm glad to state that this year's report already highlights some other initiatives carried out by anti-corruption agencies, which are now being reflected. Following the findings and gains from the 2020 analysis, TUGA in 2024 commissioned a study to review and analyze Nigeria's rating in the CPI over the period 2019 to 2024, building on the earlier report through the conduct of in-depth analysis of the methodology, data sets used, and the respondents as it relates to relevant sectors in Nigeria, with an aim to diagnose and strengthen programs for implementation for better ratings. The output of this study is the knowledge product we are unveiling today. This report provides detailed analysis of the scores and the 8 survey sets used to assess Nigeria for the period 2019 to 2023, and the additional 2 new data sources used in 2024 in the report recently released on the 11th of February 2025. This report we're unveiling provides an interpretation of the data and acknowledges some reasons for Nigeria's low scores. The report also highlights the implications of the scores to the country and makes some recommendations suggesting short, mid, and long-term steps that need to be taken by government and other critical stakeholders to ensure a better ranking. The details of this report will be provided and discussed extensively in the course of this event. It is our hope that this knowledge product will provide a better understanding of the Corruption Perception Index and help to identify elements of the assessment that may provide opportunity for remedial action and support the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy 2022 to 2026. It is also our expectation that this report will create awareness and prepare the anti-corruption community and relevant stakeholders for better and stronger engagements with the TICPI annual reports. At this point, I would like to thank the MacArthur Foundation and the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, for supporting this project. I especially appreciate the heads of agencies present. I thank you for reinvigorating the anti-corruption fight and for tirelessly ensuring that effective initiatives are in place to curb corruption. I'm also very grateful for your continued support to the work of TUGA. You all have made this a success. Thank you, and I welcome you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mara. What is the time of the announcement?
The guy on the left, looking at the left drawing, it's a short, where the lyrics, take it 1 hour. If you are the owner of the car, then
Yeah, thank you very much for it. I want to especially acknowledge the Inspector General of Police, ably represented here today by AIG Okokon Effiong. And I want to actually thank the Nigerian police for how engaged they have been in the anti-corruption fight in recent times. And the result that is already witnessing from analysis going on. I know that the corruption survey released by the UNODC last year also pointed out to some improvements in the work they are doing. And an initiative that they did engage in that has been impressive in the complaint response units of the police, and citizens are already beginning to feel the impact. You're welcome, please. Now, we also have in our presence today our funders, the funders of TUGA in respect of this activity, Center for Democracy and Development. Please, can you stand up for acknowledgement? In a round of applause for them, they made this possible. And also, ICPC is represented there by a strong team led by the Secretary to the Commission. Please, can you also stand up for acknowledgement? Thank you. Now we go on to a few goodwill messages to show Tuga and the anti-corruption practitioners here present in the community that we are all in support of this initiative, going behind the data and then taking everything by the stride. We are going to commence with the Executive Secretary of Haiti. Please tell us if you are pleased with the work that Tuga is doing, and especially this particular project. Would you like to speak from your desk, or you want to come here? Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Executive Chairman of the EFCC, who is my neighbor, seated, let me start with him. The Auditor General of the Federation, the Chair of the Code of Conduct Bureau, representatives of the Nigerian Police, the Chair of the relevant committees in the National Assembly here present, heads of fellow government agencies, and all members of the IMTT, the Interagency Tax Team. I don't know why the head of Tuga didn't want to disclose where he was. Tuga is housed in 90 House, and they are a semi-agency also functioning in 90, doing different kind of things that also align with our job. The head of that agency, that department, very effective, Barrister General Umere, also serves as the director, Legal Services and General Counsel for 90. So I approved her movement. She's currently in Austria on a seminar, international engagement, where she's representing Nigeria. So I expected her to say where she is, why. It won't be as if this event is not important. We weighed the options, and then I asked that she should go, and then her team has done a good job too. So please, on her behalf, she's currently on the international engagement in Austria, in Vienna. That's why she's not here. Having said that, I am honored to extend my warm greetings to this esteemed gathering of Nigeria's foremost anti-corruption agencies. Fellow heads of agencies, you're here today. Your presence reinforces our resolve to do things differently in our country, in spite of challenges. The gathering of foremost Nigerian anti-corruption agencies, stakeholders, partners committed to promoting transparency and accountability in governance. This forum provides a critical platform for reflecting on Nigeria's performance in the recently released Transparency International CPI TI Corruption Perception Index, charting a new course for sustained improvements in the anti-corruption efforts that we all have elected to get involved. The 2024 CPI report indicates a marginal improvement in Nigeria's global ranking, signaling incremental progress in our collective efforts to combat corruption. While this progress is encouraging, it is also a reminder that a lot of work needs to be done. The marginal improvement reflects ongoing reforms in public financial management, increased enforcement actions by anti-corruption agencies, and Nigeria's commitment to strengthening institutional frameworks for transparency. Now, the key areas that report, which I have just partially looked at, to be unveiled today. Despite this progress, Nigeria must intensify its efforts in the following key areas to consolidate on the progress we have made: strengthening enforcement and sanctions, more visible and decisive actions against corruption cases, with emphasis on asset recovery, deterrence, and judicial efficiency, are needed at this time. The second area we we need to look at is expanding beneficial ownership transparency, disclosure, full implementation of beneficial ownership register, which NATI, the CAC, and all other agencies are working together to be able to have a register that helps us to provide information and data and who is doing what, the real owners of certain assets, including the oil and gas assets. This will help us in combating illicit financial flows, money laundering, and secrecy, especially in the extractive sector, where majority of the revenues come from. The third area is on enhancing fiscal and revenue transparency, sustained reforms in budget implementation, procurement processes, and the disclosure of government revenues and expenditure. These are very key. We also think it's important to deepen stakeholders' engagement, increase collaboration among anti-corruption agencies, civil society organizations, the media, international development partners, to reinforce accountability mechanisms. In this direction, NATI wishes to publicly commend the renewed courage of the EFCC to make use of available data and information that is available. Most times we see them take on very difficult tasks, very, very complex battles. We need to support them and urge them because it's not a very easy job. We urge the EFCC and its team not to relent. Sadly, recently, they lost one of their officers on the line of duty. We in NATI offered our condolences in writing to them just as a show of support. NATI, as chair of the interagency tax team, also commends the efforts of the ICPC, the NFI Code of Conduct Bureau, the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, and all other anti-corruption agencies that also work very closely with us. There are in all 21 anti-corruption agencies under the interagency tax team. On our part, as an agency at the forefront of promoting extractive sector transparency, NATI remains resolute in its commitment to deepening Nigeria's fight against corruption and in all its initiatives. Implementation of extractive industry transparency EITI standards, which emphasizes strengthening reporting mechanisms to expose revenue leakages, underpayments, opaque transactions in the oil, gas, and solid mineral sectors. Release and prompt presentation of annual reports and credible data in the public domain. Currently, our reports are up to date. We just published 2022-2023 in September last year, and by July this year, NATI's reports for 2024 will be published. And our duty is to ensure that these reports and data are made available for citizens to have access with credible data with which they can ask informed questions and engage both government, development partners, the citizens, government agencies and companies, and all those who do transactions with credible information and data. Advocacy for policy and legal reforms. Encouraging policy makers to ensure that Nigeria's legal and institutional frameworks align with global best practices in the extractive sector. Why people take solace in dragging people to court is simply because they know there won't be any closure, there won't be any outcome, even in their lifetime. So they challenge you to take them to court because they know that nothing will change. Sometimes court cases last up to 30, 40 years in a matter that should have been disposed of and justice done without fear or favor at the time, because justice delayed, the lawyers will say it's also justice denied. In the developed world, nobody dares you to take it to court because they know there will be a closure. When we talk of judicial efficiency, we are appealing that this fight cannot really derive the right result and impact if there is no judicial efficiency. Our judicial process produces results and impact that prevents people to take laws into their hands. Automation of transparency processes, deploying technology-driven solutions such as beneficial ownership portal and open data platforms to prevent corruption risks. I announce here that under my watch, 90 is building a very modern state-of-the-art data center in our 90 house in Wuye. This data center, the infrastructure for that data center is completed. We are now moving into the contents, migrating data that we have acquired since 2004 into the center in a manner that citizens can access our reports anywhere they are in the country, anywhere around the world, with very little or minimal challenges. The 90 data center is currently on the final stage of software, deploying the right software applications that will enable us to provide open access to information and data for constructive civic engagements. As we review the CPI report, let us be reminded that the fight against corruption is a collective responsibility. The government, private sector, civil society organizations, citizens all have a role to play in shaping a more transparent and accountable Nigeria. However, we in NAITI, on behalf of the Interagency Tax Team, are also tabling a request before Transparency International and all our partners that the time has come for us as Nigerians to be fully enlightened, educated, and well informed of the criteria for DI CPI assessment. Availability of that information and the processes will help us to know exactly what to do, how to do them, and what to expect as a result. It's also very important for us to understand the basis for imputing data in terms of what we have achieved, so that we don't need to work more and get less more impact. We would like to work with the TI and all its representatives in Nigeria for this engagement and enlightenment process to happen, for the benefit of the TI report and its impact in Nigeria, and for the benefit of all anti-corruption agencies in terms of the quality and quantum of work being done, and also for building public trust between our country, the citizens, and the Transparency International. We commend them for the work so far done, but we need the process to be more inclusive in terms of exposure to education and enlightenment. NAITI remains committed to supporting this cause, and we work with all stakeholders to ensure that Nigeria achieves not just incremental progress, but a transformative leap in future corruption perception rankings, which will also help us to encourage on the work we are doing. On behalf of the board, management, and NAITI, Secretariat, and TUGA, it is also housed in NAITI, for the excellent work they have done. I wish to welcome you and urge you to please make very constructive engagement and reliable use of this opportunity we are provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just to say that Tuga had hinted me that I should allow him to speak as much as he likes. He signed the salary checks. That privilege may not be extended to other commentators. I quickly want to recognize Mr. Ashley Enonike Ogoba from the National Assembly, and who has been very supportive of the work of the Anti-Corruption Agency. Thank you very much. So quickly, in 1 minute, can we please take a goodwill message from the Code of Conduct Bureau? The chairman is here.
Hello, good morning. Distinguished guests, anti-corruption advocates, and fellow Nigerians. Please permit me to stand on the existing protocol. We gather today under the critical gaze of transparency and accountability as we reflect on Nigeria's standing in the global fight against corruption through the lens of the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index for 2024. The Corruption Perception Index is not just a number, it's a mirror reflecting our collective resolve against corruption. Last year, Nigeria scored 26 out of 100, placing us at the position of 140 out of 180. While we have moved up from 145 position, our score has stagnated, signaling that much work remains to be done. The slight improvement in our ranking does not mask the urgency for systemic change. We must ask ourselves why, despite our efforts, the perception of corruption in Nigeria has not significantly improved. At the Code of Conduct Bureau, we view this score as both a challenge and a call to action. The CCB's mandate is clear: to ensure that public officers adhere to the highest standards of conduct. We enforce asset declarations, investigate breaches of the code, and strive to foster a culture of integrity. However, the journey from perception to reality requires more than just declarations. It demands transparency, accountability, and public trust. We face challenges such as inadequate resources, but these obstacles also present opportunities for reform and innovation. As our strategies actions, we will intensify our efforts to make declaration not just a formality, but a powerful anti-corruption tool through enhanced verification processes. We are planning educational campaigns to increase public understanding and engagement with anti-corruption efforts. Legislative and policy reforms are on our agenda to empower the CCB and make our operation more transparent and effective. Improving Nigerian CPI score is not one agency's task alone. It is a national call to arms. We need the government, the civil society, and the private sector to join hands. We must work together to dismantle the structures that breed corruption, not just in perception, but in reality. Let us not be discouraged by this CPI results. Instead, let them power our determination to make Nigeria a nation where integrity is the norm, not the exception. With every step we take toward transparency, we improve not just the scope, but lives of every Nigerian. We are committed to this cause, and I invite you all to join in this noble endeavor. Together, we can transform perception into progress. Before I finish, I wish to thank TUGA for the work they have done in analyzing the performance of Nigeria and TI CPI. Finally, thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
And we now take a goodwill message from the chairman of the EFCC. So you have the floor.
Stakeholders. Guests, ladies and gentlemen, the effort of TUGA bringing us together this occasion is an attestation to the fact that all of us have risen to the occasion that it is important for us to collaborate and ensure that we do the right thing to move this country forward. Yes, we are here to review the TI Corruption Perception Index. We can say there is a slight improvement. But again, I've said it before and I'm going to say it. For us as we must be more interested in adding value to our economic and social lives and getting discouraged by any international rate. Because if we don't appreciate that, it's going to be a major problem for us. Whatever we are going to do, the priority should be to improve on our processes, to add value to our lives as Nigerians. Now, if you do the right thing, the international community will come here and copy from what we're doing and borrow a leaf from us. There is no gainsaying the fact that in the last 1 year, the major stakeholders in the anti-corruption environment, including the legislature, including the executive and the judiciary, we have made substantial progress in our fight against corruption. And nobody's going to deny that. There was this judiciary intervention. Of course, you are all aware about the Supreme Court judgment on the financial autonomy of the local government. That is a major leap. If the international community does not acknowledge that, we have to acknowledge that by ourselves and drum it up. It's a key development and advancement in the course of fighting corruption. We have been having a series of legislative interventions that has made this fight easy for us to execute. And so we must also acknowledge the intervention, the legislature this year. We are aware that they have increased the allocation to most anti-corruption agencies in Nigeria, and the state have been, independent, stakeholders doing this work. So we must also acknowledge that. TI may not capture that. We must drop it up. We must let the world know that we are making progress. I'm not sure there is anywhere in the world where it has been recorded a single real estate recovery like we did last year, late last year in the FCC. Over 700 apartments of various sizes in one single recovery. Not even FBI, not anywhere, not even America. That's a major leap. Major work that ICPC is doing in the monitoring constituency projects, as large as Nigeria is, they go to every nook and cranny. And we saw the report of ICPC, the report that was published last year. So it's a major leap for us. In single operations, we arrested over 790 corporates, suspects, 190, including 194 foreigners, including Eastern Europeans. Some of the countries that have better rating than us in the TI rating, some of their citizens were arrested by us, carrying out fraud in Nigeria. We have started the arraignment. We will see to the logical conclusion of that case. And so I want us to encourage ourselves. It can be better. There's the saying of the elder in my place, the elders. There is an animal called lizard. There are two types. There is one we call a gamma lizard, the red-headed one. They love climbing trees, even though they don't have the strength and the energy, they are going to fall to fly. And so when they climb trees to the utmost part, and they miss themselves and fall to the ground, they look around. If they still breathing, they look to the left and to the right, and they will nod. You know why they nod? If nobody praises me, I commend myself. So let us commend ourselves as Nigerians. That does not mean that there is still too much work to do. We have a long way to go. But we need to maintain the tempo. We need to encourage ourselves. We need to let people play by the rules. Sing the song, drum it up, scale up your activities wherever you find yourself. And ultimately, we will get there. Whether they give us substantial rating or not, what is important is, are we improving? Are we moving forward? Are things getting better in Nigeria? A situation where we could pay salary for 2-3 months without money from extractive industry. I think that was a major plus for the government, the current government in Nigeria. It was a major one. That shows that we need to plug some leakages. The work that NAITI is doing. Last year alone, I shared with the executive secretary how much we recovered from the report they submitted to us. And so it is important that we encourage ourselves. We got the report of the Auditor General as well. We are working on that right now. I also paid him a visit some time ago. just for us to synergize and to encourage ourselves. So what we need mostly is that synergy between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And the moment we start doing that, we'll make progress. We'll encourage ourselves. But ultimately, we'll get there. So on behalf of the entire management and staff of the FCC, I want to thank Tuga and all the stakeholders here for supporting this initiative. Thank you and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Chairman of the FCC. And I reiterate what we have said, the tempo is increasing. Let us sing our own song. A lot of the activities of anti-corruption are already being identified and recorded in the TI Perception Index. Now, let us take a few words from the chairman of ICPC, or the secretary of ICPC, representing the chairman.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the chairman of ICPC, I bring you greetings from the management and staff of ICPC. I want to sincerely apologize for his absence. Whatever I say here is that of the chairman. I wish to stand by the existing protocol which has already been established. I want to say that I'm very happy to be here this morning to give this good message on behalf of ICPC. Dear colleagues, the head Tuga, I want to congratulate you on the public presentation of your report on the review of 6 years, that is 2019 to 2024, of the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index assessments on Nigeria. Let me also use the opportunity to extend my warmest greetings and congratulations to all stakeholders involved in this project. You know, corruption, though that is still extensive and systematic in our country, despite government's commitment to deal with the monster, and the great efforts and determination of various corruption and anti-corruption agencies and its personnel at articulating viable strategies with innovative ideas to combat corruption and change citizens' orientation as citizens around the issues of corruption. The ICPC is glad to be invited to participate in the presentation of the TICPI 2019-2024 report on the assessment of our country by the Global Barometer. This report, in our view, is a crucial milestone in our collective efforts as an anti-corruption agencies to objectively review the assessment of Nigeria through the lens of Transparency International. It provides a comprehensive assessment of how rightly and correctly Transparency International have assessed our nation's efforts at containing corruption and also reviewed the erroneous perceptions about Nigeria's anti-corruption efforts. At this point, I want to thank the chairman of the EFCC on his thoughts about what they think about us. It doesn't really matter, and I share that view. What is really important is what we perceive we have done so far and the betterment of the country. We have to judge by ourselves and not allow others to judge us. We at the ICPC are very much aware that anti-corruption crusade is a huge stakeholder responsibility that requires collective commitment, vigilance, and critical self-assessment. It is in this spirit of collective faith in anti-corruption that the Commission supports the efforts of Tuga to undertake the analysis of the TICPI 2024 with practical recommendations for public consumption. Every year, Transparency International, the Global Coalition Against Corruption, ranks countries according to the perception of their performance on corruption. Most times, by their assessment, Nigerians perform poorly on the Corruption Perception Index. This kind of report, each time it is released, tend to send messages of discouragement to government, particularly to the anti-corruption agencies who put in their best, which is not really good. This is so because government keep putting in place anti-corruption measures with expectation that the country will significantly improve with time on this index. Unfortunately, the improvement has been very marginal. However, we remain undeterred because we also believe that perceptions are not always correct. As you are aware, it is CPI ranks 180 countries and territories based on perceived levels of corruption in the public.
The chairman of this event, all distinguished VIPs, the agreement lodgers to allow me to observe the already established protocol. I am here in a representative capacity because the Inspector General of Police, IGP Kayode Egbetokun, is right now attending to some exigencies of duty. He would have loved to be here personally, and so he sends his apology.
In progress.
there is no country without an element of corruption in their governance. And let me quickly add that corruption represents, either in Nigeria or anywhere else, one of the greatest threats to the sustenance of democratic governance. I am sure it was on the basis of this that not too long ago, the head of an anti-graft commission remarked, if we do not kill corruption, corruption will kill us. So the challenge it poses cannot be waved out, cannot be ignored. And so for Toga to have come with this program right now, I want to say on behalf of the General Police that the police is very much appreciative of what you are doing. This event underscores one fact, that the fight against corruption can never be a one-agency fight. The fight against corruption must be collective. Every Nigerian, whether in high places or low places, is a stakeholder. And the earlier we understood this, the better the foundation. The police is ready to offer every support Toga will need. I know that not too long ago, or for a very long time, the police has been under pressure. But importantly, I want to remark that not too long ago, some few months ago, an agency awarded the Nigerian police as the most improved agency in the fight against corruption. We'll take it off from there. We'll be ready to support whatever effort you are making or will continue to make. And so, putting the importance of this event in its rightest perspective, I wish to express our sincere appreciation of all the efforts you have made individually and collectively. I am sure that God will continue to bless Nigeria. Whether the international community likes it or not, Nigeria will continually make progress. We cannot remain at the same level at all times. Let's not allow whatever perceptions internationally dissuade us, discourage us. There is room for continual improvement. And so I wish us all the best in this deliberation. And I say thank you very much. Remain God bless.
Thank you very much. The Nigerian Police, there is room for continual improvement. And we cannot bring an end to this session and this segment of the event without hearing from our supporters, our funders, the Center for Democracy and Development. Some words of encouragement from you.
Good morning. The head of all agencies present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am standing on the existing protocol, representing the Director, Center for Democracy and Development, with the support of the MacArthur Foundation. This is a goodwill message for the public presentation of Nigeria's Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, a report from 2019 to 2024. On behalf of the Center for Democracy and Development, I extend warm greetings to all stakeholders in Nigeria's anti-corruption ecosystem as we present this critical review of our nation's perception, performance in the TICPI over 6 pivotal years. Today's presentation offers more than statistics. It provides a mirror to reflect on our collective progress in combating systemic corruption. The 2019 to 2024 period captures a crucial phase in Nigeria's democratic journey, marked by both challenges and opportunities in institutional strengthening. The Center for Democracy and Development recognizes that measurable progress requires sustained commitment. Through strategic partnership with anti-corruption agencies, most of all here present, we are working in collaboration with the EFCC, ICBC, the Code of Conduct Bureau, the NFIU, the Office of the Auditor General, and we have supported to enhance forensic capabilities for evidence-based prosecutions, cross-agency collaboration frameworks, capacity building programs for investigators and prosecutors, policy advocacy for accountability mechanisms. While the TICPI report details specific score trends, its true value lies in challenging us to ask tough questions. Are our institutions becoming more resilient? Do citizens perceive tangible improvements? How can we convert short-term gains into enduring systemic reforms? The fight against corruption remains a marathon rather than a sprint. As we analyze this 6 years strategic trajectory, let us recommit strengthening preventive mechanisms through technology adoption, ensuring consistent enforcement across all tiers of government, building public confidence through transparent processes, protecting reformers and truth tellers within institutions. Center for Democracy and Development remains unwavering in its support for Nigeria's anti-corruption agenda. So let this report serve not as a final judgment, but as compass guiding our next phase of reforms. The path to transparency demands both institutional courage and collective societal actions. On behalf of the Director of the Center for Democracy and Development, I'd like to say that he apologized for not being around, but this commitment is unwavering. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Darwin, everyone. Thank you.
Very much. In the respect of your support, and I'm sure that other stakeholders are grateful. And I have the pleasure to recognize a very strong partner, and a member of the IATT, whose chairman is always present at every event. But in this particular instance, he's unavoidably absent. The Full Responsibility Commission will be represented here by Mrs. Fatima Binta Abubakar. Special greeting to your chairman. Now, there's a specific actor here who we have to listen to today before we go into the meat of the whole program. Dr. Oji had earlier revealed that Mrs. Song is somewhere in Vienna representing Nigeria at a very strategic meeting. That is in relation to the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. And the agency that superintends that is the UNODC, United Office on Drugs and Crime, and incremental to strengthening the work of the anti-corruption agencies, in particular strengthening the processes of recovery and return of assets of Nigeria located in other countries. Those of us who have been involved with the OFAC process know that Nigeria has been the greatest beneficiary of recovery of assets globally. Somebody actually made a joke once that our former corrupt leader, Abacha, entered Nigeria into an institution, and from time to time, when it comes out on, they return hundreds of millions of dollars to us. And the agency that you see facilitating that return when we see Abacha 1, Abacha 2, Abacha 3, sometimes $300 million and beyond, is none other than the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. I want us to very quickly give us an encouraging word.
Have you all the meetings? Oh, I should use this, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone. She has done all the intro, so I don't need to do all that. But here, I have to say that my comments are going to be a little bit more personal because I'm in Nigeria, and rather than more than organization, although there is an organization angle to it. So let me first by sending the greetings or expressing the greetings of our country representative, Mr. Sheikh Toure, who is no longer absent here. And I'm going to go very straight to the point because a lot have been said, and I'm literally going to be re-echoing many of the things that have been said. First things first, let's celebrate the success. It's so good that the last two different surveys have reiterated some progress being made, and I think that's what's celebrated. So again, congratulations, Nigeria, for making those progress. In the anti-corruption world, it's 0.00001% is progress, and it's a big deal. So it is worth celebrating. The second is what everyone has been said, don't relent on your efforts. Continue the fight, and tell your story. Let the world hear you. Nigeria is known as the giant of Africa, but your stories is going to come through the impact of the work you do to your citizens. So tell your stories through advocacy, through awareness. Let your citizens be aware and be engaged through actions. As you continue to strengthen your institutions, as you continue to make, take those bold steps to kind of fight back at the different corruption challenges that emerge, you continue to tell your story and reestablish yourself as that one giant of Africa name that you have for yourself. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We say it all the time. But I was saying to a colleague that anytime it gives me joy to see everybody gather together, even if we are not cooperating, but that we come together for this purpose, it goes a long way. But let's do much more than that. And it's good to hear that is already taking place. And then this year is the Conference of State Party to the UNCA. That is the world stage where you tell the world, what have you been doing? How have you been implementing? What progress have you been made? And this is a story, the UNODC NBS report, TIs, and they've all recognized that progress has been made. And that's an opportunity for you to tell your stories. So I'm encouraging that you tell your story. Don't let us tell your story for you. Take charge and tell your own stories. I think that's very, very important. And then I think we need to still do more on corruption prevention, and it's a tough one, but someone did say it just now that it requires the effort of everybody, including citizens, not just you, but you need to kind of engage them to let them know how to help you to tell that story. So let's change the narrative, and UNODC remains supportive as always to help you do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christopher. She has just given us the information about the Conference of State Parties coming up in December this year in Doha, Qatar. And she's saying, tell your own story. Don't let other people tell your story. The heads of the agencies here present, and the Dodgy is listening to me. Please come together, package your story, and tell the world about what Nigeria is doing at that conference. Thank you very much. I will now call on Mr. Godwin Udele to usher in our lead consultants and present the report, what we are all waiting for.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Lillian. Just before I invite Dr. Fowe, Professor Fowe, actually, to present the report, let me highlight a few points that have been made by some of the dignitaries who presented good message. We sort of captured the essence of what this report is about. The Executive Secretary of NITI looked out about the importance of data in the work that we do. It will interest you to know that in this year's CPI, 2 data sources were added to the 8 that traditionally would be ranked on. Without these 2 new data sources, Nigeria actually declined by 2 aggregate points. And the reason these 2 sources have not been added in the last 5 years is because the rating agencies or the data sources will tell you there was no availability of data for Nigeria. So if they didn't have data to do an assessment on Nigeria for this year, would actually have retrogressed in the CPI. That's one. 2, the chair of CCP also reminded us that the CPI is not just about data. So I guess the challenge that poses to us is to go back, maybe take this report, run through those indicators, because there are specific questions for which answers are provided to use to assess Nigeria. To also ask ourselves, among these over 50, 60 indices, which of them is true or false about what we do, either or what we know about ourselves as a people. So it's like saying so again, that we have a patriotic duty to reject or challenge any lingering perception about us that we are corrupt, but we also have a greater patriotic duty to also challenge ourselves to not be corrupt or to fight corruption. Finally, the EFCC chairman said something about, and I'm just saying this to highlight what the CPI is measuring about countries, and in this case about Nigeria. So he talked about the over 700 property or assets that were recovered in one single recovery exercise. And now one of the data sources actually commended the EFCC's efforts in National Republic. But there's another indicator that measures the integrity of the system that we have in place, the effectiveness of the integrity system that we have in place. And now, so it will raise question about the system that allows a single individual to acquire that level of property, asset, before, we read in the papers how the EFCC stumbled on that piece of evidence. I don't know whether it was correct or not what we read in the paper. I won't go into the details. But so if the EFCC was not investigating this individual, it meant it probably would have gotten away with it. But that's not the fault of the EFCC in this case. It's a judgment on the effectiveness of the integrity systems that we have in place that allow those things to happen. And now it's also saying that the CPI is not an assessment on the work of the anti-corruption agencies. If you look at the indicators, maybe less than 10% is asking questions about effectiveness of prosecution of corruption. Over 90% is talking about how the civil service run generally. So I'm just highlighting those few things so that during the presentation we'll be able to we'll have at the back of our mind what the CPI is assessing. Now, just briefly to provide context to the presentation. So we have these 10 data sources for Nigeria for 2024. It's not all of them that are assessing corruption or the perception of corruption in Nigeria or the effectiveness of anti-corruption efforts as of 2024. About 4 of them covered up to December 2023. That's nothing on 2024 efforts. And I'm saying this for a reason. Some of the recent efforts we are making might not reflect now, but in later years. About just one has up to January 2023. In fact, it covered mostly at the end of 2022. One has data up to June of 2024. One covered just 2021 and 2022. Nothing on 2023, nothing on 2024. Then the final one has data up to May of 2024. So to provide context to this, it's not entirely the situation or the perception as at the current period. Some of the things we are doing now might reflect in future periods. Without wasting much of our time, I want to know if Professor Fuwe is around. He was part of the team while he was a consultant at Leti in 2020, who worked on the first report. So he also provided analysis on the one with the current expanded focus. Professor Babajide Fuwe is not in the country at the moment, so he's presenting virtually. Prof, can we know if you're on?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Okay. So, can we give him a round of applause in anticipation of a very insightful presentation? And I know you also deserve another one when you finish the presentation. Once again, Prof, you have the, let's say, the screen or the floor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. So what I'm just going to be doing will be to present a summary of Nigeria's TI-CPI scores over the past 6 years. And also, this is our point of emphasis, that we need to understand the data. And in understanding the data, we need to understand the sources. And when we understand those sources and what they're looking at, then we can find innovative ways to strategize and improve Nigeria's rating in the TI-CPI. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as Mr. Gordon and Mrs. Onwure have said, we had a project in 2020 that initially looked at the TI-CPI, and largely we were concerned then with, after the release of the report and the furor it generated in the polity, we were concerned with looking at the index and saying if it actually was communicating the correct story about Nigeria. So at that time, we did largely two things: to look at the methodology and to look at ways in which we can identify strategies for remedial action and improve the anti-corruption fight in Nigeria. Next slide, please. Yes, so we wanted to understand more deeply the way the TI-CPI is constructed, and then to now find ways in which we can disseminate to the different government agencies on how to improve Nigeria's ratings. Next slide. Yeah, so for the current project, we started in 2024, and we had 4 major objectives. First of all, we wanted to understand Nigeria's TI-CPI rating over 6 years, that is 2019 to 2024. And crucially, we wanted to understand the methodology, and we wanted to understand the kind of data that was used. And we also wanted to have meetings with stakeholders, which we've done, and we'll be doing that as well today. And finally, we wanted to make recommendations on how to improve the country's rating. So just quickly, 2 things I will highlight is, first of all, when the TI-CPI is released, there's this feeling that many people think that Transparency International actually conducted surveys in Nigeria. Okay, so this is not what actually happens. What happens, as many people have said, is that different bodies or different agencies across the world, they conduct different analysis based on expert surveys of different facets of corruption in the public sector. And so what Transparency International does is to combine this, is to standardize the measures and then combine the measures and arrive at one aggregate score for different countries. So, I mean, for this, there are pros and cons of this approach. As Mr. Gordon has said, sometimes when you come to aggregate all these scores from different sources, sometimes you have issues with the methodology, you have issues with the statistics, okay? And then the other thing is that what Transparency International does with the CPI, as Mr. Godwin said, is not actually an assessment of the work or of the effectiveness of the anti-corruption agencies. What it's doing is to provide an assessment of what people are perceiving as the levels of corruption in the public sector. Then the question becomes, why should we be interested, okay? And the way we are looking at this, which I'll come back to later on towards the end, is that Transparency International is very widely regarded across the world, okay? And so whatever ranking or whatever score Nigeria in this case has, many people listen to what they're saying, many people read the reports, and then crucially, it sends signals to investors across the globe. So why we should be interested in this is that if our scores improve, it will send positive signals to investors, it will send positive signals to ratings agencies, it will send positive signals to the financial markets, and then it will be possible for funds or for investment to be channeled into the country. Next slide. So what I'm going to do briefly is just to take us through what we discovered was Nigeria's ratings over this 6-year period. So what TICPI does, that is the Corruption Perceptions Index, is to rank countries based on perceived levels of corruption, okay? And so we can have scores or we can have ranks. So for the scores, we have scores that range between 0 and 100. And a score of 0 means that the country is highly corrupt or the country is perceived to be highly corrupt. And then a score of 100 means that the country is perceived to be very clean, okay? And so countries that rank low, what TI has done is to generally conclude that they have high levels of corruption and then conclude that they have authoritarian governments, while countries that rank high, that is, that have scores close to 100, they are generally perceived to be clean, and then it is taken that they have good systems in place and that they follow strongly the rule of law and that they are largely democratic countries. Next slide, please. So looking at Nigeria's score, so we have two things. First of all, there's a score that looks from 0 to 100, okay? And then 0 means that the country is highly corrupt, and then 100 means that the country is clean. And then there's a ranking. So for the ranking, we have 180 countries that are included in the TICPI. So what they do is the country that has the highest score, that has a score that is closest to 100, that is perceived to be clean, they are ranked higher. So they have a rank of 1, 2, 3. So they are ranked from 1 to 180. So what this would mean is that the countries that are ranked high, that is ranked 1, 2, 3, they are perceived to be clean. And then the countries that are ranked like 100, 150, or 180, then they are perceived to be more corrupt. So we're looking at the two different indicators. So first of all, for the score, between this period that we looked at, between 2019 and 2024, Nigeria generally had a score averagely of about 25. So we see from figure 1 that in 2019, the score was 26, and then it fell slightly to 25 in 2020, and then it fell a little bit more to 24 in 2021. And then between 2021 and 2024, it increased slightly to 26. So generally, we say that on the average, Nigeria had a score of 25. So if we compare, looking at the range between 0 and 100, we see that 25 is closer to 0 than it is to 100, okay? And we also say that countries that have scores that are closer to 0, then they are perceived to be more corrupt. And then countries that have scores that are closer to 100, they are perceived to be cleaner. So what this will tell us, just by looking at this, is based on Nigeria's average score of 25 over this 6-year period, then the indication would be that Nigeria tends towards the bottom part of the score range and so would be perceived to be more corrupt. And then the score now feeds directly into the ranking of the country. So in figure 2, we see Nigeria's ranking over the 6-year period. And we see if we are considering that we're looking at 180 countries, and then the countries that are ranked first, second, third, fourth, they are perceived to be cleaner. And then the countries that are ranked 150, 160, 180, they are perceived to be more corrupt. If we see that our ranking was between 140 to 154, so this indicates that we are closer to the bottom of the ranking. And so again, we are generally driving from the score that we obtained. Then when the rankings are done, then we generally tend to be ranked amongst the group of countries that are perceived to be more corrupt. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we can just looking at the range between 0 and 1, that is for the scores between 0 and 100. So we see that we have 10 sectors or 10 deciles, and Nigeria's score generally was ranked between 20 and 29. So we had an average score of 25. So we see that this is the third decile, and we see that we are very close to the bottom of the pyramid, where generally it will be considered that we are more highly corrupt than countries that are ranked closer to 90 or 100. So the general conclusion in this case is that as far as Nigeria is concerned, based on the scores from Transparency International, from the Corruption Perceptions Index, it would indicate that we have high levels of corruption. And generally, we don't see much movement over the 6-year period. Largely, we saw that the scores were between 24 and 26. We'll come to those issues later. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the major reason why those scores did not change much and why Nigeria's rankings did not change much is because the scores from the data sources also did not change much. So, as has been said by Mr. Godwin, between 2019 and 2023, there were 8 data sources that were used to compute Nigeria's CPI, okay? And then we had an additional 2 new data sources in 2024. So what we see when we look at these 8 data sources between 2019 and 2023, we'll see that they did not change much. So for example, the Bertelsmann Foundation Index, it changed between 32.85 and 34. And then for the Economics Intelligence, it was between 18 and 20. And then we see that for all the different data sources as well, they did not change much. In fact, when we go deeper into the data, we'll see that for some of these data sources, there were years when they did not change at all. So you can have a score that is maybe 20 for 1 year, and then it's 20 for another year, and then it's even 20 for the third year, okay? So because these data sources did not change much over this period, then by the time they're aggregating them to get Nigeria's score, then the scores will not change much. And so Nigeria's rank scores and subsequently our ranking will not change much. And so what we're pointing at in this case is that when we understand the intricacies of this data, then we can begin to start to address some of what these data sources are looking at, and then identify ways in which our scores can increase, and then this would feed directly into the CPI scores. And then when we look at the 2 additional sources that were added in 2024, we see that for both of them are 31, okay? And when we look at most of these other indicators, that is the previous 8 indicators, most of them are below 30. So when these new data sources were added, it was possible to boost our scores in this case. And again, this is a key critique that many people have addressed, that when you have countries where data is not available, then it would obviously affect the scores. And so how can we make sure that, or how can we reliably conclude that this is the true score when some of this data is missing? Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a summary of looking at the different indicators. So for example, with the different colors indicate the different indicators. So we see for the first one, you see that largely it did not vary much until last year. And then for the second indicator, the Economics Intelligence Unit, again, it did not vary much until last year when it fell. And then for the Global Insights, again, it did not vary much until last year when it fell. Then for PRS, we see that again, they did not vary much until it increased substantially last year as well. So we see that mostly because the indicators from these data sources are not changing much, then it is not possible to affect Nigeria's ranking. And then we see finally for the bottom that for the two new indicators that are 31, that they were able to boost our score. So for example, we say that for 2024, for economists, it was 18, and then for the Global Insights, it was 19, and then for the Varieties of Democracy, it was 12, and then for the World Economic Forum, it was 15. So the inclusion of these two new data sources with the high scores was able to improve our scores for 2024. And we hope that these two data sources will continue to be published, and even more data sources will continue to be included for Nigeria's assessment. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we did two major comparisons. First of all, we looking at Nigeria's scores. How do we rank when we look at averages across the world? So firstly, we looked at comparing Nigeria with the whole of the sub-Saharan subcontinent, and we saw that Nigeria, our scores were lower than those of sub-Saharan Africa. So averagely for sub-Saharan Africa, we see scores ranging between 32 and 33. Whereas for Nigeria, we saw scores ranging from between 24 and 26. So we were ranked lower than even the sub-Saharan African average. And then when we look at averages across different regions, we see that Western Europe and the European Union had the highest average CPI scores of about 64, between 64 and 66. And then other regions had lower scores. So we saw for Asia Pacific is about 44, between 44 and 45. And then for the Americas is between 42 and 43. So we see that generally as we come down on this scale, the CPI scores tend to get lower. But the key thing we highlight here is that looking at all the regional averages, our scores are low. Then we also, next slide, we also looked at when we come back home to the sub-Saharan African sub-region, when we compare our scores with our peers in sub-Saharan Africa, we see that we are ranked in the bottom third. Okay, so if we count here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we are ranked 14th from the bottom when we are compared with our sub-Saharan African peers. And then the countries at the top, countries like Seychelles or Cape Verde or Botswana, we find that they have CPI scores that are in some cases above 60, that is for Seychelles. And then for countries like Cape Verde and Botswana, in some cases, their CPI scores are above 50. So this tells us that when we look at our neighbors, what are they doing with the way they are communicating their strategies, the way their public sector is being run, where they are able to obtain these high scores, that we can look inwards and we can improve some of the things that we're doing. Next slide, please. Yeah, so generally the takeaways are that over this 6-year period between 2019 and 2024, we had consistently low scores from the Corruption Perceptions Index. And these low scores led to situations where we were ranked low in the rankings. And both the scores and the rankings imply that the projection is that we have high perceived levels of corruption in the country. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we now, having looked at the scores and the rankings, we just briefly look at the way the scores are computed and the kinds of data that are used. Again, the central idea is that in order to improve our scores, it will be good to understand how Transparency International computes this index. And then in understanding how Transparency International computes the index, we look at the different sources of the data, and we can adequately address our rankings or our scores when we understand these data sources and when we understand the methodology that is used to compute them. So this is what we'll briefly look at. So what the Corruption Perceptions Index does is to aggregate data from different sources. So all in all, they use 13 sources, okay? And then depending on the country, for some countries, the data sources will be more available than for some other countries. So we see that for Nigeria, for most of this period, for 5 years, 8 data sources were available. And it was those 8 data sources that were available that were used to compute Nigeria's CPI between 2019 and 2023. And then when 2 new additional data sources were available for Nigeria, then these were included for the computation in 2024. And so what the Transparency International has done is that over time, they have tried to refine and revise and improve their methodology so that now, when you look at the scores from when they started computing this in 2005, the scores are now standardized. So we can adequately compare what was the score in 2005, what was the score in 2010, what was the score in 2015. Over time, we can compare over time because they have been able to standardize their methodology over time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so when they are computing the CPI, they generally use 4 steps. First of all, they look at these data sources, and then they try to standardize, and then they aggregate, and then they report a measure of uncertainty. We'll just briefly look at this. Next slide. So the first thing is they select the data from data sources. Like we said, there are broadly 13 sources, but in Nigeria's case, they have largely used the 8 data sources that were available. And then the different data sources look at different indicators of corruption or in the public sector. So some of those things that those data sources look at are things such as bribery, or when people divert public funds, or when public office is used for private gain, or state capture, or nepotism in the civil service. Next slide. And so to appraise each of the data sources, there are different criteria used, such as how reliable is the methodology, or how reputable is the institution that is actually publishing the data, and then how granular quantitatively is the data, and also can we compare across different countries. And crucially, it's important that there's a time dimension to the availability of the data. Next slide. So after that, they try to standardize the data sources, okay? And by standardization, what they try to do is to make sure that for all the data sources, the data has a range between 0 and 100. Because what the CPI scores that they publish, what they do is they rank perceived corruption from a scale of 0 to 100. So for a scale of 0, it means that a country is highly corrupt, and then a scale of 100 means that the country is less corrupt or clean. So what they do when they identify each data source, they calibrate and they standardize the data to make sure that it aligns with the way the CPI is scored. So for each data source, when they calibrate or when they standardize it, they make sure that the data source has a score from 0 to 100, where 0 would mean that it is more corrupt, and then 100 would mean that it is less corrupt or it is cleaner. Next slide. And then after ensuring that each of the data sources has a range between 0 and 100, what they then do is to take the average, okay? And then the average would be, for example, in Nigeria's case, with the 8 data sources, after standardization, each of the data sources would have a range between 0 and 100. And then what they would now do is to average for the 8, or for the case of 2024, to average for the 10 data sources, which would give one indicator for the country. Next slide. And then lastly, to satisfy some statistical requirements, they report standard errors, standard deviations to measure uncertainty of the data. Next slide. Yeah, so between 2019, like we've said, there were 8 sources between 2019 and 2023. And then lastly, we had the 2 new sources. So we'll just run through the 8 data sources that largely fed into what we had between 2019 and 2023. Next slide. Yeah, so the first one is the Bertelsmann Foundation Transformation Index, okay? So what this index does is to look at, is a qualitative survey that is conducted by experts, and it tries to assess how government is effective in curbing corruption. So for the latest edition, the conclusion was that there was a fairly high perceived level of corruption in Nigeria. And then we just highlight some of the key areas of concern. And for the Bertelsmann Index, we highlight 3 things. First is that there are cases of the highlighted cases of corruption in public procurement relating to inflation of contract, and also weaker anti-corruption systems. And also there are some gaps in fiscal transparency. Next slide. And then the second data source is the Economics Intelligence Country Ratings. In this case, for this one, it is both a quantitative and qualitative evaluation, and largely it addresses financial risk. Again, for the latest edition, the general conclusion is that there was a fairly high perceived level of corruption in the country. And we also highlight some major areas of concern, which they highlighted, which include the abuse of public resources, and then payments to bribe to securing contracts, and then some special government funds for where there was limited accountability. Next slide. So for the third one, which is Global Insights Country Risk Ratings, this one is a qualitative measure, and it looks to address, or it looks to assess how we have different incidences of bribe taking, from either petty corruption to higher levels of corruption. Again, the general conclusion from the latest edition is that there's a fairly high perceived level of corruption. And then areas of concern include issues related to bribery or corruption in areas of awarding of contracts, or in areas of permits, whether importing or exporting permits, and also in paperwork. Next slide, please. So we also have the PRS International Country Risk Guide. And then in this case, this is both a qualitative and quantitative assessment. And then, so for all these different data sources, what generally happens is that all of these indicators are produced by different agencies or different entities. And then they have experts, or sometimes the experts are, sometimes there are many experts, sometimes there are a limited number of experts. But what they do is that each agency has a list that it goes through and each agency focuses on different aspects of corruption in the public sector. Okay, so what they do is the experts or the analysts, they take the different lines that the agency has identified, and based on the information available to them, they assess or they rank the different countries according to what they are focusing on, okay? And then at the end of the day, what Transparency International now does is to take for each of the different data that they have, to take the aspects that relate to what the CPI addresses and to pick that and then to standardize, and then they now aggregate for each country. So for the PRS International Country Risk Guide, in this case, this is both a qualitative and quantitative assessment. And what they try to do is to look at how high the level of corruption is within the political system. So again, what the latest edition and the conclusion was that there was a fairly high perceived level of corruption in the country. So again, the general conclusion from all the data sources we're looking at is, the general conclusion is that there was a fairly high perceived level of corruption. And so for all these data sources, what this means is that the score after standardization, the score was very low, that is between 0 and 30. And this score now fed into, after TI now aggregates, or after TI now averages, the score, those low scores led to Nigeria's overall low scores. So in this case, the areas of concern include things such as excessive patronage or nepotism or exchange of favors. Next slide, please. So we have the World Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, where in this case, experts at the World Bank provide assessments on issues like transparency and then accountability and then corruption in the public sector. Again, in this case, the general conclusion was that there was a fairly high perceived level of corruption. And then we highlight some areas of concern, such as there not being a transparent exchange rate management system, and then the absence of effective financial management in the country. Next slide. So we have the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey. In this case, they are focusing on bribery that is associated with government institutions. And again, the general conclusion is that there's a fairly high perceived level of corruption. And we highlight some areas of concern. That is, we have issues related to illicit activities as a result of technology. And we also have issues related to security and economic issues at both the state and individual levels. Next slide. So we have the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, and this one tries to assess the practice in rule of law. And we highlight some of the areas of concern which relate to things such as the using of public office for private gain, and then things related to judicial officers, and then law enforcement, and then parliament as well. Next slide.
Can you please round up?
Oh, okay. Can we, next slide? Yeah, so the next slide. Yeah, so just what we want to focus on is that the scores that Transparency International produces, they are highly regarded across the world, and they are highly referenced by different agencies or by the investment community. So we highlight three major things. First is that having a low score can limit the access of the country to foreign credit. And because of this, it can discourage investors from bringing their funds into the country. And also because of this, it can also affect how profits are repatriated. And finally, so because of this, that's why we feel that it's important to identify the data, next slide, the data sources. And what the CAPI does is to focus on these different levels of public sector corruption. So when we understand the data and we understand what they are trying to focus on or what they try to address, then we can start to strategically highlight or strategically improve our communication, strategically improve the way we project what we are doing so that there can be some shifts in the data that all these indicators are capturing. And those are what we highlight in the different recommendations, looking at things we can quickly do in the short term, and then things we can do in the midterm, and things we can do in the long term. Largely to see how we can project what we are doing, how we can strategically address the different indicators that those data sources are looking at, and so boost some of the scores that they produce, and so boost our rankings. When we do this, then we'll be able to address some of these negative effects of foreign credit and investor confidence, and ultimately we can boost the growth and development of the economy. Thank you.
Very much, Rob. Please, a round of applause for Professor. You know, when professors are talking, it's really difficult to get them to talk, especially in the specialized area like this. He has given us a lot of information. I know some of us are burning with questions, and then we need to unveil the report. And then I'm sure Tuga will make available this presentation as well as make available the full report so that your policy and research departments can engage it. The two things came out of this whole discourse and this whole presentation. There's always this, they call it corruption perception index. From the time of our engagement with this process, when we had to make presentations to the vice president and everything, and from what Dr. Professor Fowowe has shown us now, what actually the output of this research is not a perception. You hear him saying over and over again, qualitative and quantitative form of research. So despite the fact that it is called corruption perception index, it is more than a perception. So let us take that away. Let us not dismiss it as a perception. That is number one. Number two, the effects. No matter how we feel that they are not capturing everything we are doing or what issues we have with the report, the effects cannot be ignored locally and globally. So those of us who want to ask questions, please, you can indicate by raising up your hands while we go through the process of unveiling the report. I will now call on Dr. Orji Ogbonnaya Orji to lead the process, and the heads of the agencies here present, the Code of Conduct Bureau, ICPC, Inspector General of Police, development partners, CCB, the UNODC has left, and FIRS, your chairman, and Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Please, can you all step forward? Yes, I know Mr. Eze is contemplating the details of this report so that he can go and analyze it later on. Mr. Eze, please come forward. Dr. Orji, please lead us through the process of unveiling this.
And where is Bosse? Bosse, please also join us.
Join us.
Well, we have all listened to the analysis already presented. You are the one unveiling it. Allow us to unveil it now. Wait, let's unveil it now. We'll drag it. So we have all listened to the analysis, including some of our earlier concerns on the criteria for the TI assessment. We equally listened to the review by Tuga and then the analysis presented by Prof. I think this is something that all the agencies need to take home. And we do please request Tuga to convene in no distant future a workshop to look at this presentation by Professor Foo in details. It's very important that we Nigerians, especially state and non-state actors, understand the basis and criteria for TI assessment to enable us see how we can work along that criteria to improve our country's rating. The report we're about to unveil now will help us in this process, and I invite all my colleagues, the chairman, Code of Conduct, Police, ICPC, Tuga, all stakeholders to join hands to unveil this report for the benefit of our country and for use to improve our TI rating going forward. I think we deserve a round of applause. Well, I urge you to hold at least one copy of the report. And we need civil society represented. We need somebody, a representative of the media. The media, a representative should please join us. Someone from the media. They are not here. Okay. We think this is an opportunity that we need to partner more with the civil society and the media to amplify our voice, and this report should be widely circulated. We do hope that by the time we are gathering here, next TI report review and assessment, that our country will not just marginally improve, will substantially improve on the global rating. Just like Prof highlighted, these ratings are necessary for investment decisions and also for global perception of our citizens, especially at the point of entry of other countries and even in business engagements and citizen transactions. We really want to thank you for your patience, and as the moderator has said, Sister Lillian, please make use of this opportunity, ask informed questions on the presentations already presented. On behalf of our colleagues gathered here, we need to thank you for bringing this to the fore and ask that this report forms the basis of knowledge sharing and advocacy going forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, we can take advantage of the presence of the prof online if you have any burning questions. Pending a more detailed workshop to analyze the issue, please you can answer. We also have our colleague here who works closely with him, Godwin Obene, who can answer some of the questions. Yes. Is there anybody? Do we have questions? Mr. Edgar, you're looking as if you have questions from me. Yeah. Is there a roving mic? Somebody should please give them a mic. You can hold this.
So I don't, we have to agree on the format. Maybe we take the first set of questions, answer them, then proceed to the next set, or we answer the questions as they are asked. Which one we want?
Yeah, so we have a question from EFCC. Is there any other person that has a question based on the presentation? ICPC, you wanted to ask a question? Okay, Godwin, please, let's hear from that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Abiodun Adebanjo. I head the research unit in the Department of Policy Planning and Research Institute. Mine is not a question, but rather a comment. I listened in on Ross' presentation, and I can't help but agree less. I mean more. What I mean by that is simple. We tend to have this opinion like that there are certain concepts that are relative. I was privileged to attend the training in 2013, and in that training, we're told about the 40 principles of life. And when you ask a typical Nigerian, he will tell you that integrity is relative. That's not true. There are global standards that are accepted that if you find A, B, C missing, it's no longer integrity. So probably what the perception we have is to think, no, there are certain things that we have our own version of. Now, there are benchmarks. That's what I've just discovered with the CPI. There are benchmarks that you cannot go below. So we need to up our ante in ensuring that for us to be able to change our CPI rating, we have to up it to what is expected of us. That's just my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very scientific observation. Any other questions? Any other comments? I can see we need time to actually look at the report and internalize it. And don't worry, I'm sure God will provide another opportunity for you to fully engage it. In the absence of any other comment or question, I'll call on Mr. Boseden Oguntuberu to give us closing remarks from Tula.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. The Executive Secretary, Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the Chairman, Code of Conduct Bureau, Dr. Abdullahi Usman Bello, the Chairman EFCC, Mr. Ola Olukoyede, the Auditor General for the Federation, Mr. Shakai Kayeto, Honorable Prince Kayode Moshood, representing the Chairman House Committee on Anti-Corruption, AIG Okon Effiong, Special Protection Unit representing the Inspector General of Police, the Commission Secretary of the ICPC, members of the Monitoring and Evaluation Committee of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy 2022-2026, all members of the IATT, Interagency Task Team, members of the Project Steering Committee of the implementation of the report of the Corruption Risk Assessment Project carried out to the Nigerian seaports, development partners, CSOs, and media. On behalf of the head TUGA, Mrs. Jane Onwumere, I sincerely want to appreciate every one of us here for attending this program. We've seen the need for more participation among the ACAs. We need to do more. We need to tell our stories. We need to do more so that the benefit trickles down to the common man on the streets. We cannot conclude our closing remarks without expressing our gratitude to the MacArthur Foundation Center for Democracy and Development for the continued support. Then, I would also like to appreciate my forever boss, my mentor and role model, the pioneer head tutor, Ms. Lillian Ekanyawu, our consultants, the media, everyone that have supported to make this program a success. We want to say thank you for coming. As we all go back, we wish you all safe trip back to your respective destinations. Thank you very well. Thank you so much as we all work to free our country of corruption and increase our rating in the perception in the TICPI. Lunch is set. Please, we want the VIPs to go first, then we follow. Thank you all and wish you all safe trip to your respective destination. Thank you.
Change it to picture, image. That's Hey, I see you are the only one holding camera. Okay, let's move.